It's really nice to be with you here today. And, thank you for Michaela and Andrew for asking me to come along. Um, when I heard about what you're doing with Open Minds and its approach to radical inclusion, I was just so excited to be involved. This is an approach to breaking down barriers and flattening the power dynamic in education and employment through creative practice to help minoritized people access these things that I've been doing in my career with Spectrum First Education and Think Like a Scientist, which just really excites me, and I'd like to share a little bit with you about. So you're probably wondering who I am and sort of why I've appeared on your screen. So I feel like I should introduce myself a little bit. So I'm Jamie Williams. I'm based in the north of England, based in Leeds, Manchester, York, and Sheffield primarily. And I'm currently working on some exciting collaborations internationally through research, which I'll tell you a bit about in a moment. My background is English language and literature, as I had a real fascination with how language can impact people, how it can inspire some people, and it can constrain others and define them. So I really am fascinated by how language can shape our perceptions, our world, and our impressions of ourselves, the world we live in, and of each other. I then moved into studying and practicing education in universities, completing an education degree and studying the first postgraduate course in autism at Sheffield Hallam, before then being drawn to critical psychology and sociology, where I found a field that was just aflame with the kind of debates that I'd been feeling and hearing in education that really lit up my mind about how culture and medical science, diagnostic criteria, and actually society more widely often fails individuals by misunderstanding or overlooking the intricacies and the intersections of their lives and their lived experiences, and how this can result in stigma and withdrawal and people being left behind and not included in things. In my other life, as Michaela very kindly introduced, what I'd refer to as my creative life, I was a lead songwriter in a band called No Ceremony, and lucky enough to tour with Pixies, Foals, the XX, bands like this, and at the moment doing film soundtracks and television soundtracks in sort of my spare time. Professionally, after touring and being sort of a touring musician in 2010s, I became the co-director of Spectrum First Education with Gemma Barstow, and started running Think Like a Scientist with Professor Phil Herron. And we've been involved in research collaborations with the University of York, Bristol, the University of West of England, York St John, and the University of Toronto, along with the UK government. And all of these projects all focused on how we can better understand the life experience of autistic, ADHD, and neurodivergent people in education, employment, understanding what the barriers are, how can we attack them, using this radical inclusion principle, how can we remove them through understanding and by listening to the voices of the people that are ignored or overlooked. I also have an advisory capacity with the UK Department of Education on non-medical help support for neurodivergent students, and as part of Spectrum First, I also directly interact with those making decisions at a local level in York and Sheffield councils. It's only recently that I've managed to sort of conjoin up my creative life with my professional life and my academic life, and bringing sort of music and art into what we do. And that's especially been the case with Think Like a Scientist. And I think this is, why it's just so exciting to be here today and hear about what you're doing, using creativity and having these sort of discussions around how this can be used to break down barriers. So my goal has always been to creatively challenge and remove barriers to education and employment for minority groups. And the way that I've always tried to do this is taking a co-productive and collaborative approach to developing training, support, and research. So I'll tell you a little bit about the companies I'm involved in and what we do. So Spectrum First was founded in 2004 by a very renowned author in the field of autism, Christine Breakey, who's an absolutely wonderful person. I really recommend looking into her writing if you're interested in neurodiversity and autism. She formed a really small team in Sheffield of specialists, and they were supporting a small number of autistic students at the University of Sheffield. I took over the company with Gemma Barstow in 2019 when Christine wanted to retire. Christine still works with us, thankfully, and it's really helpful to have her participation. But since we've taken over the country, we've now expanded this team, and we now support over 800 autistic and ADHD diagnosed university students in the UK every year. And we also offer coaching and mentoring support to neurodivergent professionals. And we also perform workplace assessments. We go into workplaces, talk to managers, talk to the leaders of these businesses, working with people like Sony, Rolls-Royce, Apple, and we understand how they work and sort of where maybe there's breakdowns in communication or in people's understandings of their roles, and how that can be improved to make sure that the neurodivergent people working there are actually thriving rather than just surviving their roles. So to achieve this, we employ a very knowledgeable, diverse and skilled team, 60% or over 60% who are neurodivergent themselves. And this allows us to build really deep connections with people that we support and make sure that our work is always reflecting the cutting edge of what neurodivergent communities are telling us about their experiences and what they're finding difficult in education, but also what they're finding exciting in education. Our ethos is to improve the lives of neurodivergent people, challenge instances of discrimination in workplaces and education that might be intentional or actually unintentional. Often these things, I'm sure this would have come up in some of the conversations you've had and will have this week, that actually often it's systemic or societal bias that leads to barriers being constructed and people not being able to access things. And actually we live in societies that don't always prioritize those that think differently and experience the world differently. So we like to try and educate around this. And we do this in the UK by advocating for reasonable adjustments to be made in education, which is looking at the Equality Act and the legislation around how someone shouldn't be denied access to education and good work, and how we can use people's strengths and make sure they're understood by the people they work with. We're a value-based company, and we subscribe to the social and critical model of disability and the neurodiversity paradigm. I don't know if these are familiar terms to those of you in the room, but basically these are based on the belief that there is a lack of access and understanding in society structures and cultures that create barriers for neuro-minority people and those considered disabled, and actually that these people are disabled by this lack of access and by this lack of knowledge and lack of adjustment. So rather than thinking of people as being disordered or disabled, actually there's natural variations of human diversity, which should be celebrated and supported, because they should be allowed to contribute as much to society as neuro-majority groups that society privileges. So the prison work that I've been doing with Professor Phil Herron, which Michaela was listening to us talk about in Helsinki, is in conjunction with the University of Toronto. And it's a program called Think Like a Scientist that applies the ethos that I mentioned before. So in this scheme, we visit prison facilities and have done so in the UK and Canada, including Durham's Men and Young Offenders Institutes and Grand Valley Women's Prison in Kitchener, Ontario, amongst others. And what we're doing is teaching weekly science workshops in which we break down topics such as space travel, AI, neurodiversity, volcanic activity, and teach them in a conversation and student-led approach. So this focuses on teaching the scientific method that you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, which is essentially encouraging people to improve their critical thinking skills. But also this comes with a byproduct of improving self-esteem and employment skills. So what we're doing is encouraging people to understand how to ask a question, construct a hypothesis of what the answer could be, different ways to approach it, conducting experiments to test this out, considering the outcomes, and then analysing the results of sort of how we've approached something, whether it's worked or not, and either going back and accepting that failure is very much a part of science, or moving forward and communicating these results to people. And we find that this is a really, really positive way to interact with people that have maybe been left behind in education and that have actually maybe felt very much like failure is something that they have experienced in their life and that they want to avoid at all costs. It might be that actually a fear of failure has kept them away from education. So we feel this is a really positive message for learners in prison who feel like they've failed in education or actually in their lives, and perhaps don't see themselves as having a future. And by accepting failure as something that we can learn from, the scientific method is a really useful way to map onto the mental health skills, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, that actually people use in interventions in prison, but often don't connect with the people they're trying to help. So if we can encourage people to rationalize an issue and consider alternative explanations rather than reacting violently or destructively to situations, this can be a really positive thing. And we've seen this work quite well in classrooms, especially when, you know, many of the students have had very negative previous experience of education. So as I mentioned on the slide here, there's minority stress and stereotype threat research, which shows that many people feel that education just isn't for them. And actually, because of the societal position they have, they feel like they are not invited or to participate. There's too many barriers. They're not going to succeed, so they withdraw. And that can be really, really damaging to their self-esteem and their sense of identity. So we decided to approach this by not having a formal syllabus or a hierarchical approach to teaching. So what we do is have a very dialogic and conversation-driven way of teaching. So it's very interactional, it's truly co-productive, and it's about the students actually working together to tell us what they'd like to learn about and discuss, rather than us sort of leading it didactically, and because actually that can leave people behind. So as you can imagine, working in prisons, we don't always have the most access to resources. So often we have to do this with just a piece of paper and a pencil. So we have to really involve creativity in this process. And the key is actually making it accessible. So using language and resources that people can access, no matter whatever their previous education, literacy or life experience have been. And we invite everyone to participate. So we try to celebrate every act of engagement or participation that people can make, rather than prioritizing certain, you know, achievements or doing what sort of traditional education does. So, you know, we also try to make this very relatable. So we're considering how what we're teaching can connect to an individual's life experience. So, for example, when we taught the space travel, we asked as part of the homework for students to write a letter imagining that they're astronauts traveling to the moon as part of their homework for the week, and to do this creatively. So they're using their imagination, but they're also showing what they've learned. And actually, this is really beautiful, because not only did they show what they'd learned in the week, and that was fantastic to see how much they'd sort of retained and how much they'd connected to what we were teaching. But also it was really beautiful because they did it from the perspective of people who are away from their loved ones and sort of maybe at a distance, and they really connected their own personal experience with this sort of piece of creative writing, and that seemed like a really positive way to interact and for people to engage and show their learning, to sort of demonstrate it to us. So why is this important? Why are we actually doing any of this? Well, in the UK and actually worldwide, it's believed that 1 in 5 so 20% of people are neurodivergent. In the UK, particularly, and I'm sure it's the same in many other countries around the world, the school expulsion rates are significantly higher. So the people excluded from education is much higher in autistic, ADHD, and neurodivergent people. In prisons, there's been studies to identify that probably about 25% of people in prisons would meet the ADHD criteria, and around 10% would meet the autism criteria were they to be offered assessment. For neurodivergent people, there's a 30% risk of poverty and a 12% risk of homelessness, which is far, far higher than the national averages. Shockingly, there's been research showing that actually the life expectancy is far lower for autistic and ADHD diagnosed people. And this is just awful. And we feel that this is due to systemic barriers rather than anything inherent to being ADHD or autistic. There's high levels of unemployment, with only 16% of autistic people in full-time employment in the UK, and significantly higher dismissal, so people being fired who have an ADHD diagnosis. There's far higher instances of co-occurring mental health difficulties, so anxiety and depression. But all of these things, they're not medical, they're not linked to someone's, the pathological explanation of someone. It's because of society structure. It's an inequality, a lack of support, a lack of, understanding. and actually a lack of creative involvement with people that think differently and experience the world differently. So in terms of the impact of this, so for Spectrum First, we've got significantly higher rates of students graduating with 40% less of a dropout rate. So about 95% of the students that we support complete their university education compared to the national average, around 65%. There's far improved mental health with less crisis situations in the people that we support. We're actually one of the largest employers of neurodivergent people in the north of England. And as I mentioned before, we work very in depth with large companies to change their cultures, challenge things, and actually practice this sort of radical inclusion. With Think Like a Scientist, we've been just so amazed by the impact of that, and actually the way that people engage, how hungry they are to learn when it's broken down and presented in a way that works for them and that they can access. And we've had quite a number of students actually come away from this, and this has been a stepping stone to them engaging in doing formal education, and actually people that never felt like they could be learners or students going to university and getting degrees. So we've got a number of people who are now studying. They've left prison, and there's very high rates of people reoffending, but we're finding actually this isn't the case for people we've taught, and they are going into education or using the skills that we've worked with them on to gain employment. In the data that we've taken from these classes, the people we've taught, that we've established that actually one of the biggest things are people believing that they can be a learner. So actually they've said to us, before I took this course, I didn't believe that education was for me. I didn't believe science was for me. I didn't believe that I could be a student or a learner. I just thought of myself as a prisoner or a criminal. But actually by engaging and having actually, rather than engaging, being engaged by good educational practice, that people have actually begun to see themselves in a different way and seen their possibilities in a different way. That's improved their self-esteem. It's led to an amazing point of data that we received, which is actually when we started the course, 0% of people said that they felt that science was for them, that they can engage with science. And 100% at the end felt that science was them by the finish of the course. And actually collaborating with people, so we're taking on people and shaping courses with them. So to give you a bit more, I suppose actually to use someone's actual words of how they've experienced it. These are quotes from former students that Think Like a Scientist. So my mind feels like it's expanded. I no longer feel like that stupid kid that never holds their hand up and holds their breath when the teacher asks a question. I never got to go to college or university the way I planned when I was younger. This gave me a tick on the bucket list. And for a few hours, I felt like I lived a dream. And my favorite one from Dalton Harrison, who's a student who's now studying in University of Leeds and is a published poet since studying in our course and leaving prison. He said, "Science taught me about a world I've never felt a part of, because I didn't understand it. Science taught me to connect ideas, take notes, create plans, and figure out routes. It showed me that scientists will take a chance, and if it does not work out, they'll find another way, and you can build ideas through other people's work and add on, develop, teamwork, build on failure as an achievement. But above all, learn to keep going forward." So that really strikes me as a sign that someone's found their way into education that was previously inaccessible to them, and I think that's just so crucial. So to finish, how we do this is we very much take a non-diagnostic, an unjudgmental approach to the support and the teaching we do. We can't presume to know how someone understands the world, how someone thinks, how they experience the world, or how they've been shaped by their past experiences. So what we can do is prioritize their voice, to listen to them and create a safe, validating and trauma-informed space so they can tell us about themselves and what they experience, how they work best, how they think best. Then we can truly listen and put that into action. We engage in the latest critical research as a form of a lens to look through, so that we can be more aware of the intersections of people's lives, how their gender, sexuality, race, religion might impact them and their learning. And we use a really person-centered approach, which focuses on helping someone find and use their strengths their best way of learning and participating, rather than focusing on only problems or insisting that actually they learn in a way that doesn't suit the way that they think and how they want to learn. So an example of this is with Spectrum First. What we do is train people in the lived experience that neurodivergent people tell us about. So phenomena such as autistic inertia, rejection sensitive dysphoria, sensory processing difference, the double empathy problem, these sorts of things which actually shape people's lives hugely, but don't appear on any diagnostic criteria. They don't, appear in any of the sort of very negatively focused pathological approaches to these conditions. Another example is when we went to a prison in Ontario, we researched that actually had a very high population of Indigenous people in these prisons. So what we did is we hired and worked with a team of scholars and residents to research Indigenous experiences in education, so that we could ensure that we were using, the ways that they would learn best, so stories, and that we were avoiding sort of things that might trigger sort of further trauma or resistance to education when we went in. So it was really sort of trying to understand the people that we're working with. We always try to challenge our own assumptions, thinking of our own position in society and the impact we might have on other people. And a big part of this is actually thinking very carefully about the language we use, how we can, affect people hugely, and actually how accessible education is if we use particular terminology or particular cultural references or abstract language like metaphor, figurative language. This might not be accessible for everyone. This can really cause barriers. So we try to use what's called a plain speak approach to English to make it more accessible to people. And we try to create safe, collaborative and sensory aware environments. We think about what someone's sensory experience of a room might be. So for example, in one classroom, we found that because it wasn't carpeted, actually people's footsteps were distracting the learners that we were trying to teach. So we moved to a carpeted area, which reduced the auditory overload they're experiencing, and people actually learn much better in that environment. And we try to apply the principles of compassionate pedagogy, which is something we're researching with collaborators, Lorna Hamilton and Stephanie Petty at the moment, looking at how actually to truly be compassionate in our approach, we need to learn an informed and inquisitive approach to removing barriers and being motivated to challenge them. And this applies a universal design for learning process, which adapts resources and actually tries to create multiple access points, which is just so wonderful that I know that you will have been talking about in these sessions. But most importantly, what we believe is that we need to enjoy creating together with people. And what we're trying to do at the moment is actually follow this sort of movement in research. We went to a wonderful conference in Vienna where they were looking at how stories and poems and music and food and art and film, all of these creative things are actually really meaningful in education and landing teaching with people. So we were very inspired by that. And inspired by actually the fact that there is no right way to learn and participate, that people have to be able to approach things on whatever level is possible, but also be engaged by things. So what we've been doing, we Think Like a Scientist, is using art and music to try and commemorate and celebrate learners' emotions and thoughts. What we do at the end of every session is we take their emotions from the session and we take the thoughts that they have and the main things that stood out to them, and we use their own words to pay respect to their engagement by creating a song or an artwork that actually uses the language that they've used. And we've been doing this in collaboration with artists and songwriters and filmmakers. And actually, this is where I've got to use my music skills and actually participate in this form of sort of creative education. So what I did with the students in Canada is took these sheets and within a week wrote and recorded a song around their reflections on climate change, all based on their words, turned it into lyrics, and then was lucky enough to come back the next week and play it to them. And it was amazing the reaction we had. And actually some of the people that we'd been teaching who had maybe been a bit quieter in the class became really inspired and started producing artworks for us to put onto this song. And actually this was a moment that really engaged everyone, and probably one of my favorite moments in my career in education. So what I'm going to do is just play you the song that was created by the students of Grand Valley. So this is a song using their words.
Across the country, as wildfire spreads out, I'm questioning everything in my life and what I can do to help make changes before ice caps melt. Learn renewable living, buy less clothes and think about the earth's health. We could be changed if we rearrange. We just need to remember to commit to saving our beautiful world. We could be changed. We won't feel ashamed if we save our beautiful world.
So what you're seeing there is all of the words are from the students. Every single word there has come from them. And, you know, that this was, when we played the song to them, this was something that actually they couldn't wait to share with their families. They couldn't wait to tell us about how much it meant to them. And it was one of the moments that caught me as one of the people that hadn't really said much in the class up to this point. Just became really excited, really engaged, and said this was what made them feel like a student and what made them feel like a learner. And to me, this really shows you just how a creative approach to education can be so important. So in terms of what we're doing next, we're collaborating with the Social Justice Institute on some research with the academics I mentioned. We're publishing some research that we've done with the University of Bristol in York, with the Office of National Statistics, and we're providing training in autism, ADHD, and neurodiversity for companies around the world and universities about how we can remove barriers. And we think like a scientist, we're looking to implement programs and workshops in different cities and countries, currently looking at Finland, another workshop in Canada and Western Australia at the moment, and we're publishing further research papers on the progress we've done. If you'd like to, if you're interested and would like to look into those, and yeah, you know, just to finish off, if anyone is interested in any of the things I've been talking about, would like to be involved, like to find out more, these are all the details that you can get in touch with me on. So thanks so much for listening, and yeah, if anyone has any questions or any comments, then I'd love to hear.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Jamie. I think there will be some people who take you up on this for further follow-up and so on, and that includes me and Michaela, of course. I want to do a sort of quick Q&A if that's possible.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Only because I have a question. There was one phrase in there that I wasn't familiar with, which was double empathy. Do you want to just tell me what that is?
Yes, absolutely. So double empathy. It's research that's around, it's called the double empathy problem, and it comes from a remarkable autistic academic called Damian Milton, and it came as a response to, I don't know if you would have heard it, but there's a theory of autism called the theory of mind theory, and it's basically a theory that has now been really attacked and disproven as quite sort of stigmatizing with autistic people. Basically, it says that autistic people have an impairment in understanding what's happening in other people's minds and therefore don't have empathy with other people. And what people have done is sort of critique this research to find that actually it comes down to communication and accessibility. So if we don't communicate in a way that autistic people can access, then they can't access what we're trying to show them. They can't tell that we're feeling something. They can't demonstrate empathy to them. But if we break it down and communicate it in a way that is accessible, then actually they often have deeper empathy than anyone else. So what Damien Milton did is talked about the double empathy problem by saying, why are we critiquing autistic people, their ability to understand neuromajority or non-autistic brains, and actually how much do non-autistic people empathize with autistic people? And actually what this research has been used to do is show how society disadvantages those that are thought to be different, makes them feel disordered, makes them feel deficit, like they're doing something wrong, they have flaws, when actually we should be valuing everyone and recognizing that a lot of it comes down to communication and making things accessible.
Fantastic. That's really helpful. Thank you. We're actually getting some nods and applause in the room here, which is so some people are absolutely recognizing that or familiar with the research. Would you mind stopping your screen share?
Yes, yes,
so we
of course.
back on the big screen, and see if we have anybody else who wants to ask something. I thought it was just Swedish people that did this.
No, I think it's Kirsi Mustalahti here, and from ACCAC Finland, and I am from culture and art field, and we are developing our society by using culture and art as a tool for understanding and sharing knowledge and on accessible way. Actually, all the things that you were talking in autism spectrum, and also think like a scientist, is like so, it's so same. Like what we are, the lack of knowledge is so many times, and attitudes and the barriers also in our own mind to face people as they are. And I'm like really happy to meet you, James.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, I'm very happy to hear that, and thank you for sharing that. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that these barriers, you know, they might be slightly different in different cultures and different countries, but they're universal. And often, you know, as humans, societies do just prioritize the privileged, and that can include the neuroprivileged, the neuromajority people that maybe don't learn and think in the typical way, you know. But actually, I think people across the world are waking up to the fact that we need to use people's differences and their, you know, the diverse ways of approaching a problem if we're going to move forward as a species. And, you know, and actually there's a lot of research now that shows that it was neurodiverse minds that did things like create the wheel and create fire. And, you know, these are the theories that actually they've always been pushing humanity forward, and we've actually lost a little bit of their contribution in becoming too rigid in the way that we, you know, and who we serve and who we prioritize. So yeah, I was in Finland a few weeks ago, and I could really feel that desire in the people we were interacting with, that they wanted to remove these barriers as well. So that's really beautiful to hear that you're seeing the same thing and feeling the same thing over there.
One of the things that's been really important about this project for me is exactly what Kirsi is talking about. You're doing something, it's not the same thing, but there's such significant overlap between and I think connecting the dots between these sorts of projects and actually getting more people on board related projects, and actually starting to be a movement more than just, you know, a lot of ambulances at the bottoms of cliffs.
Yes.
I actually think is a really important thing to do. So I really appreciate your time today, because this sort of connection, even if the only thing that comes out of this, and nobody heard anything that you said, but you met Kirsi as a result of that, I think that in itself is so that's a very.
And then
Deborah, if I'm go for it. Go, Kirsi, go.
I would just shortly say that we are starting one amazing Creative Europe project next year. We are focusing on that, for children from 6 to 11, and develop the most accessible performance in Europe, and of course the guidelines for everyone to do that afterwards. So I think we will have a lot of things to do together.
Yeah, please get in touch. I'd really love to hear about that.
Michaela, oh yes, sorry.
Thank you so much, and it was really nice to meet you. And I found some similarities in our background because I'm also a musician who is now going to the PhD school, and also like considering my also like let's say disabilities issues. I was interested in performing in different conferences, considering this topic of disability, inclusivity, and diversity. And I'm representing ACCIC, and also I study in Sibelius Academy. I'm preparatory student for doctoral studies in Sibelius Academy, and I really like the idea of the projects. Think as a scientist, like scientists, because it's also now we have a very big discussion in Sibelius Academy, how the research and like basically like scientific work should be accessible and open for everyone. And this kind of biases we also have in music, like separating, I don't know, folk musician, jazz musician.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like a Western classical music, which is shouldn't happen, I think.
Yeah.
And I really like, the idea, the way how you approach to the, this scientific knowledges to prisoners. I think it's amazing. And I think, I'm very nice. I'm very pleased to meet you.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, please do get in touch, because we're always looking for, fellow musicians and academics to collaborate with, and actually produce art, but also, create teaching. And actually, yeah, when you're talking about that sort of categorizing of different forms of music and, different people, we have to think about who these categories serve and why they exist and where they come from. And often it's governance and it's convenience, and particularly in the medical fields, it's the only way that they, but by having sort of really rigid diagnostic criteria, that's how they can organize people into certain categories and manage their resources essentially, but they don't always serve the people and the individuals. So yeah, I really agree with you on that.
Thank you.
I'm online, and there's someone at the back of the room. Please go first. I can go last, no problem.
I have a question also about, have you been applying this Think Like a Scientist and other things that you are doing, the amazing things that you are doing, into universities or institutions that teach teachers or people that are becoming teachers? Because I feel as a former teacher that we never had any actual like teaching about neurodiversity or autism spectrum, even though those people who are neurodivergent are in our classrooms and trying to, as you said, like manage to learn in the similar way that neurotypical people are. So have you also been doing like collaborations with universities that are teaching future teachers?
Yes, well, that's such an interesting question, because actually that's something that we are looking at the moment, because in the UK, but worldwide, there is a crisis. There's a crisis of the fact that teachers aren't being equipped with the knowledge and the skills and the training, or even just time to be learning about neurodiversity and learning about the specifics of autistic and ADHD and OCD and all the different neurotypes of these learners, and how to meet their needs, how to understand them, how to adapt. So we are looking at actually trying to sort of move into training these teachers, but we haven't done that yet. We've been looking at some funding with Innovate UK, but yeah, we're sort of just moving towards that. So if you would like to get in touch and talk to us about that, we'd be really interested to hear your experiences and sort of anyone that's sort of involved in that sector. We're really interested to talk to you, because it's a real problem. What we do is we do go into universities and train lecturers and tutors there to understand these things. But in schools, we haven't quite got there yet, but we've realized it's just so critical, because there's, there were some statistics recently about the amount of students, neurodivergent students that leave school, but also the mental health impact of, I think it was something like 70% of 16-year-old students have clinical anxiety symptoms from being examined and being assessed and learning in a way that doesn't suit their needs. And that's awful that children would be affected like that and shaped like that. So this is something that we really want to challenge next.
That's great. It's also so nice to hear, because I switched from teaching to communications. Now I'm a communications major, and
Yes.
my interest in that field is inclusive language. So
Right. Yeah.
I was like, yeah, go on. What your field, like, wow, that's so amazing.
Yeah, it's so important. Yeah.
I'm just going to say we have another question at the back of the room.
Oh,
here.
yes.
Mine more than a question. So I want to tell all of you, like what she said is so important. So I am dyslexic and autistic. My sister has ADHD.
Mhm.
Okay. And I think it's more important to teach teachers about neurodivergent people than us, the neurodivergent, because when you're a student, you're just a kid. You don't understand what is going on.
Yeah.
And I'm from Italy, and I have been literally bullied by teachers.
Mm.
And my sister was like even more bullied than me, because I was like studying a lot. I was like trying so hard to do my best. She was like kind of lazy, but she had been bullied so much by teachers. So yeah, I think it's even more important to teach the teachers before divergent people. And yeah, in the end, you think you are the problem, but in the end, I had to teach myself how to learn. And I have a master's degree. I talk fluently in 4 languages. Being neurodivergent in the end can be a superpower. You just have to figure out how to use it. It becomes a problem only when you are forced in the box.
Yes. Yeah. I completely agree. And I think, it's, I imagine to achieve the things you have, it must have been, quite a struggle, and you've had to sort of, I think so many people internalize these feelings of blame and stigma and shame, actually, for not thinking in the way that others do. And I really agree with you about needing to educate the educators. That's critical. That's what we're doing in our York St. John Social Institute, Justice Institute research is actually looking at, what are the constraints on educators to actually deliver the training that we can give them, because often it's institutional, the reason that they can't, they don't have time or the resources to do it, but it's critical because it really impacts people. There's a really interesting piece of research by Patty Douglas about teacher talk, and it's about the language that teachers use in the classroom, not necessarily directly to neurodivergent students, but just about them, that the students hear, and the negative impact that has on their identity and their self-esteem. And I do definitely agree with you that the level of education about neurodiversity and about the specifics of autistic and ADHD experiences, it really needs to be improved. But I think at the same time, I would say that I think people need to understand themselves as well. Certainly, they shouldn't be expected to advocate for themselves all the time, or identify what barriers are affecting them, identify where their struggle is, because they do need support to understand that. But I think it's really important that autistic and ADHD and neurodivergent people are given support to learn about themselves and find their strengths and celebrate them and use them as well.
Michaela.
So thank you, Jamie, and thank you everybody for your interventions, because this is such an incredibly important topic, obviously, but also what I find interesting, Jamie, is that you've addressed the prison system. And even though, some people may say, okay, you have high statistics that neurodivergent people disproportionately end up on the wrong side of the law. People will say, well, yes, that we are talking about 2 different things. We're talking about good people on one side who need assistance, and on the other hand, we talk about bad people. Now, I think that actually this division is not helpful at all. And the reason why I would say it's not helpful, maybe you can elaborate a bit and you can help me with articulating this, is that we create prisons to ostracize people from mainstream culture. And that's the worst possible punishment. They feel even more excluded. It's when they are not included in culture, they don't have the emotional support of society. It is deliberately taken away from them, and it is demonstrably taken away from them,
Yeah.
that they actually can also develop more of neurodiverse issues. Am I right in speaking? It's what I think it's interesting is that you are teaching them to learn to think like a scientist, but you are introducing the cultural component and the cultural support that it takes to get there. Would that be correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you put it so well. We went into the prison in Toronto in Kitchener, and we taught a week on neurodiversity, and sort of I went through, you know, some of the things I've been talking about today, and talking about maybe more in detail about things like rejection sensitive dysphoria, and trauma, and how neurodivergent people are stigmatized and misunderstood in education, supported. And there were people in the room, you know, in tears and really connecting to this and saying, I've never heard these things. I've never had a way of looking at my past and my life like this. And I never had support to understand myself. And, you know, we were teaching some regulation strategies. So when you're feeling triggered by something, how can you try to sort of regulate yourself, take a moment? How can you approach your sensory processing? How can you approach your breathing, your body, in order to be calm and think through how you want to act and actually not react. And it was just so interesting listening to them saying, you know, this is how I've ended up here. And it's actually, it is a lack of support. But as you were saying, people are ostracized, they're kept away, they're kept sort of, you know, minoritized, you know, whether it's through a lack of understanding of their neurodiversity, whether it's poverty, race, class, you know, gender, whatever it is, often the prisons are populated by the least supported people. And actually what we find every time we go in to teach people, you don't meet bad people, you meet people who've been incredibly disadvantaged, have made maybe poor decisions, or actually haven't been supported to avoid making poor decisions. So yeah, I completely agree with you on that, Michaela.
Thank you, Jamie. You know, this kind of holistic perspective to inclusion, I think it needs to include all aspects of our society and where we put people in disadvantaged situation. So I think it's a really, really big project. I would be very, very keen for all of us to join forces, Kirsi and all of our partners,
Yes.
from the partners in the room, and all of the students who are interested in working with us. And maybe, Deborah, we work towards another lab where we can gather all the people in the room together and really kind of work as a movement to change.
Absolutely.
Things.
Yeah.
I'm aware that we have a group in Tirana who are sitting there very politely and not raising their hands. And I just want to say hello, Polis. Do you have anything you would like to jump in on before we wrap this up?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your presentation. Was very interesting. And I think especially for our context, the context of Albania, where there is lack of information for us, it's very important to be in touch with this kind of perspectives, because it helps us and our students also to get much more informed, and for us also as lecturers to start to think about all of the aspects of inclusivity, especially when we do also architecture, since we're doing architecture students. So I don't think, do you have a question? Well, in the room, nobody has any questions, so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's really interesting to hear if, you know, if you're starting this journey in sort of looking into these things, you know, please do get in touch. If there's anything we can do to help, we're always happy to you know, collaborate with people and deliver training, workshops, whatever will help.
Yeah, that would be very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody, Jamie Williams.
Thank you.
We are now going to break for lunch very shortly. Jamie, you're free to go. You don't have to have all my housekeeping announcements. Likewise, Polis University, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks also for jumping in, Michaela. I really appreciate that.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Have a good day.
Bye.
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 So just take my face off the big screen. And so here's what's going to happen. That's pinned, hopefully. Okay, so when we come back from lunch, which will be at 12:45, we are going to go back to the tables that we are currently on, right? You are going to get back to your little clusters of, these are my friends and, and so on, but these are also your friends. But I want to do one more exercise before we start to split up again, because I think that would be really helpful. So just bear in mind, take a note of where you're sitting at the moment. That's where you're coming back to after lunch. Lunch is from 12 till 12:45. So at 12:45, you will be sitting here. Questions, comments, thoughts, observations? Anybody? All right, you can start the queue for the coffee machine now. And we will meet you back at 12:45. Have a fantastic lunch, which you will be responsible for making yourself. Which will be fun. Oh, sorry, before you do, I just realized something very important that I've neglected to do. Before we talk about lunch, we need to talk about dinner. We need to know who's having what for dinner tonight. So we have a list here. You cannot go to lunch but through Karen. And you need to put a little line on here. I'm going to start by showing you how we do this. Do we have a pen here? You don't have a pen? Okay, students, who has a pen? Yes, okay. All right. Well, that's allowed. But why don't you come back? Okay, so I am putting one on beef. So as you go to lunch, choose beef, vegetarian, vegan, and make any notes for allergies. And I will end this in full.